At first, he was kind of horrified and shocked. So he said to me, Chris, you're ghostwriting this whole thing? I said, well, do you like the work? So I didn't answer the question. I said, do you like the work? And he says, yes. Has the work changed for you? He goes, no. Have you ever wondered how I'm able to do 3 sets of storyboards in one day? He goes, it never occurred to me. I just thought you were really fast. I said, I am really fast. I'm fast at hiring friends to get the work done so that you get the amount of exploration that you need and just directing them.
Hey Hatchlings, welcome to the Motion Hatch podcast. I'm your host, Hayley Akins. I'm so excited to introduce this week's guest. We have Chris Doe from design studio Blind and also educational company The Future. The Future helps designers and creatives with the business side of the industry. We went into so much stuff. I know you guys are going to get loads out of this episode. We talked about how to price yourself and negotiate with clients. And also we talked about different revenue models. I mean, it's just packed full of information. I know you guys are going to really like this one. So here we go. Hey, Chris, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
It is my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Cool. So you're the founder of Blind and you've done some awesome work and you've been in business since 1995. Is that right?
That is correct. We are 22 years young.
Well, that's like such a long time. It's crazy.
It's longer than some people have been alive that's probably listening to this.
Probably, yeah. So you also run an education company called The Future. Do you want to just give us a bit of background on why you started that and who it's for?
Sure. It'd be my pleasure to. Now, I just want to let you know, before I became a graphic designer, I've always wanted to be a teacher. I just didn't have anything to teach. So this has been something that's been inside of me for a really long time. And my 2 loves in life before I found design was entrepreneurship and teaching. I just love the idea of sharing something I know to help somebody else. So a couple of years back, I'm going to say about 3.5 years ago, an old college friend from school said, I know that you want to teach. I'm doing this thing, you're doing this thing. Let's combine our forces and let's start something. So originally The Future wasn't even called The Future, it was called The School. And that was the brand that my friend Jose Caballer had came up with. So he pulled me very reluctantly onto camera and said, let's just sit down, let's do some stuff. Now, initially the content we were producing for YouTube was mostly geared towards selling a kit that we had produced. And so we would talk about the pain points of designers all around how to run an agency, how to grow a practice, the difference between a freelancer, a business, and an agency, how to work with clients, all that kind of stuff. That was really all the big pain points that we're touching upon. We just so happened to make one solution that solved that problem. The channel grew and evolved into what it is today. I've since then branched off on my own and I'm producing all the content as The Future. Jose's gone on to do other things in his life. We're still friends. But now it's grown into this full-blown content platform where we teach a lot of other things besides the business aspects. What most people might know us for are for the topics around how to charge for a logo, how to negotiate with a client, how to overcome objections in the sales cycle. But now we're diving into topics like typography, graphic design, lettering, and other kinds of design fundamentals.
Yeah, it's really, really cool. I really like it. And it's just so interesting to, see like how you kind of run your business and things like that. I heard on the School of Motion podcast that you pretty much started hiring people as soon as you became freelance.
That is correct.
Do you want to just explain that a bit?
Yeah. A very fortunate thing happened to me in that when I was freelancing, I got more work than I could do. And I never really enjoyed working by myself. So I'm not sure the real motivation behind this. It could just be out of loneliness that I don't want to work by myself. So I'd rather take a pie and instead of eating it all by myself, cut that pie into some portion and say, here, you eat this part of the pie and I'll eat a little less and we both have something to eat. So the first person I reached out to was my old roommate and he wasn't working and he wasn't going to school. And so I reached out and said, hey, I'm doing some logos. I could use your help. I trust your style and your instincts. Come on over and let's work together. So that's pretty much how it began. I would just give him work to do. And in the process of working with him, I would also kind of teach and I don't even want to say art direct, but I would just advise him as to how to make it better. And in the early days, designers would come in and get me 85% of the way there. 85% meaning that it was almost ready to present to the client. And I would just come in, swoop in at the last minute, open up the files and make some tweaks myself, and then present it to the client. And that way I was able to scale how much I could produce in a given amount of time for how many clients we had. So even if it were 2 or 3, they were throwing a lot of work at us. So it was more than enough to keep first 2 people busy, and then 3, and then 4, and then 5 people.
Right. So you weren't like charging one client more for your team as such. You were kind of just producing more work in a shorter amount of time.
Well, I want to clarify that different clients paid me different rates per day. And in the early days, I was working as a remote freelancer offsite. It was a relationship I had built, and they trusted me enough to work offsite. So working offsite, if I was designing a logo and they asked me for 4 days worth of logo design, I would charge them a certain fee. I think back then I'd probably charge $400 or $450 or something like that. And then I got into doing motion design, doing style frames, sequential design, and I was able to charge more. So the 2 different clients, even though it was the same amount of time I gave them, I was able to charge different rates, because in the motion design industry back in 1995, 96 was still pretty like nascent. Like it wasn't even, motion design wasn't even a term back then. And I was able to charge more, and it started changing my rates really fast from 4 to 5 to 6, $650 and $700. And as long as I could produce the amount of work that was valuable to them, there was no issue about paying me that amount. So I was changing my rates almost weekly.
Yeah, I think I've got a question actually from my community that kind of relates to that, from Evan Wright. He wanted to know whether, as motion designers, I guess, should we be charging a different rate for design as we charge for animation? Because most people just charge a day rate, right? And maybe they do the design and the animation. But I think he was kind of asking, should those things have more value or less value?
I think in an ideal world they would, but it would be very hard to convince the same person who hires you to pay you 2 different rates. It really would.
Yeah. Because
then let's say in an instance you do roto work, and roto work is not high value work. It's necessary, it's valuable, but it's not high value work, meaning that they can have a roto farm somewhere do it for a lot less than you. So if you were being consistent with your prices, then you would say, well, for roto work, I would charge you $150 a day. For animation, I would charge you $550, and for design, because you book me so little for it, I would like to charge you $850. I just don't see it being realistic, even though that is truly the market value for these things, right? Relatively speaking.
Yeah.
So I think if you're working for 2 different kinds of clients, one client you did design for and another client you did animation for, you could possibly charge 2 different rates. And why would you want to charge 2 different rates? Well, typically speaking, when you're booked as an animator, it's for a longer period of time. It's for weeks, maybe months. But for design, generally speaking, it's a couple of weeks, a couple of days. And so you're not going to be able to keep yourself busy long enough. So you could theoretically and justifiably charge more for design. I'm not saying design is more valuable than animation. It just tends to be booked for shorter periods of time.
Yeah, and I think it's with illustration as well. A lot of illustrators would charge a usage fee and stuff, but obviously when we're doing design for animation, we don't generally do that.
No, you don't.
But then I guess if we're going to do a design and then it would go on a print ad or something, as well as the animation, then we should be charging a usage fee as well as a day rate to make the animation.
Yes, again, like in an ideal world, that's how it should work. And even graphic designers should be able to get usage fees, but it doesn't work that way. And you might be able to get that, I don't know. Most of the times when you're working as a freelancer, you're probably going to sign some kind of independent contractor agreement. And in that agreement, it's going to say that you assign all the rights to us. This is a work for hire product. So no matter what you do, we have to own it, because we have to be able to grant the same rights to our customer, our client. It's not that often that an agency will say, well, we want to use the designs for something else. Can we enter into a licensing agreement? And you can. As the agency owner working with the studio and back and forth, you guys can negotiate something. I heard of PSYOP being able to pull this off. I spoke to a producer from the client side who was working on the Happiness Factory project, where they came up with dozens and dozens of characters, and Coca-Cola, on the advisement of their agency, wanted to own those characters.
Yeah.
So you can imagine that on top of getting paid to do the work for the commercial, PSYOP and the production company got an extra amount of money on top of that. Now, I'm not sure that amount of money was shared with the artists that worked on it.
Yeah, I think I guess that would come more into play if you had more direct to client jobs, right? Because
correct.
you're not going into somewhere and like working on their machines or whatever. So that's kind of when, maybe you could charge a usage fee for the illustrations, and you could also, charge for your project files and things like that. We've kind of discussed a lot of that on the podcast before. So I think you're right. And then if you're more like doing the day rate work for hire, then I guess you're not going to be able to do that.
Yeah. If there's a middleman, middle woman, middle person, middle company, chances of you being able to negotiate that after fact is pretty slim to none, very rare. But if you're working with the client directly, most definitely, then you're the agency or the studio, and then you have to have terms of work, assumptions that you make. And in terms of like listing out who owns what you get, what you don't get, you get the final product. You don't get the work product. You don't get the process. You don't get any of the files or assets. And you don't get to use this for anything else than what is specified.
Right, yeah. Do you think that freelancers should kind of aim to be in that position, even if they're not going to be kind of acting as a studio? Or do you think there's kind of, some people want to go more down the work for hire route. Some people want to kind of run their own projects and, maybe do what you did and hire some people, even if it's just remote.
Yeah. So I'm going to say my first slightly controversial bit, and it's going to get some of your listeners probably upset.
Okay.
I think our industry, the creative industry, and specifically the motion design industry, has an unhealthy obsession with the word freelance. And I want to talk about that because I've railed against this idea. I said, you are not a freelancer. You're an independent business owner, even if you have an employee of one yourself. And to change the mindset. And if you look up the word freelance and look at all what that means, basically you're a temporary employee with no benefits. You are a temporary employee. The company owes you no loyalty. You owe them no loyalty. You go in like a mercenary, you do the job, and then you leave. But you're a temporary employee. And the reason why it's important and why labels matter is what you call yourself is how you start to govern your thoughts. So if you call yourself an independent business owner, well, independent business owners have a different mindset. You have ideas about growing a staff, terms of agreement, scope of work. They have a bidding process. They understand what they own and what they don't own, and the transference of said intellectual property or copyright. They understand all those things. And that's where we start to delineate where if you're truly a freelancer, and we work with tons of freelancers, so I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but just realize what you potentially are holding yourself from being able to achieve if you just change your mindset and become more of an independent business owner. So from the very beginning, I was a freelancer. I worked at a company for a period of time. They would book me for a week, 2 weeks, a month, whatever it was. I had a set day rate. I worked on their machines. I worked with them, and whatever they got from me, they owned it all, and I didn't care, and I was okay. And then I started to work independently from my studio, and it started to become a little murky as to what I was now. Was I a freelancer in their mind? Yes. But I was building my own company at this point, thinking of myself as a business owner. So that's how I could change my rates. That's how I could add people to work for me, work with me, and hire other people to do sales. And I started to change. And even though they didn't know it, I was changing. And when I had the opportunity, I would then send them new scope of work or work agreement. And then I would be able to send that over and say, this is what you own. This is what I own. And I started bidding on projects. As a freelancer, you don't bid on projects per se. You might estimate your time, but you don't bid on projects. And that opens a whole nother can of worms.
Yeah, so I think a lot of freelancers that I know kind of have this debate of like, should you start branding yourself more as a company if you kind of want to get those direct to client jobs and, treating your clients in that way? Or is it better just to be like viewed as an individual freelancer, but try and change the way you work?
Well, what are the pros and cons from the community that you talk to? Why do they choose one or the other? And what's the debate about? I'd like to understand that before I give you my thoughts on it.
Yeah, so I think the main thing is if you're kind of one person, like an individual freelancer, companies will treat you a bit differently, and maybe they'll feel like they have more of a personal relationship with you. And then if you start saying like, oh, I'm a company, things like that, the benefit of that, I guess, is they kind of might give you bigger jobs because you can kind of expand the people that you work with, even if it's just say like me, and then I hire some animators remotely and a sound guy or whatever. So I think that's kind of like some of the benefits of both. But I think people are just unsure what to do really, because you get to a certain level and then it's hard to differentiate yourself without kind of starting a company. Say you don't want to make the traditional kind of studio like you have, but you want to have bigger projects and you want to be able to hire other freelancers. I guess there's benefits and negatives to both.
There are, and most of what you're talking about is a matter of perception. And then I have to kind of question if the perception is correct. That if you're a freelancer, that you have a more personal relationship with your prospective clients versus a company. So let's see if we can dive into that a little bit. I'm a company. I have very personal relationships with my clients. They call me, I email them, I know about their kids' birthdays. And so we have a company of 13 people, but when it comes down to it, there's still human interaction. It's really about positioning. So I don't say that one way of labeling yourself determines the kind of personal interaction relationship that you have with your client. It's a lot to do with how you manage yourself and how you govern yourself. So let's take the example. Let's say I'm a freelancer and I'm working with a company. And so the relationship should be very personal and intimate, but I'm slow to respond to emails or I give really short, curt answers. Well, here I am as an independent one-to-one relationship, but my communication style is that I'm distant, I'm non-responsive. And that's really on the individual and the way you run things, as opposed to say, I have a company now and I've got 13 employees. When a client emails me, I respond as fast as possible when it hits my inbox. Even if I don't have a great answer, I say, I've got this. I'm going to look into the answer for you. Because that's one of my hallmarks is responsiveness. Like I care and I'm concerned that the communication be very open and clear. So let's move that off the table now, unless you want to debate that a little bit.
No, I think you're right. I mean, I've heard that kind of over and over again. People worry that they're going to lose some of their clients, maybe because they think, oh, it's not just you anymore, or the clients will think that you'll have to charge more if you're a company. I mean, maybe that's your reasoning for making a company, but...
Well, that's entirely up to you. So, okay, let's look at this. This is called an objection. When somebody says, no, I'm not going to work with you because it's not you anymore, that sounds like a pretty negative objection. And I can say, you are right. It's not just me. I have a whole team of people here to support me. I've got the best compositor, someone who's really good with color correction. I've got somebody here who does amazing 3D work. So when you used to call me before and you thought, Justin's not the right guy because he doesn't do 3D, now I have that capability of being able to do 3D work for you. So please consider me for that. There's strength in numbers, and I believe in working with people who are more talented than me. But what I assure you is that I got my eye on all of what we do. So it's going to meet my seal of approval, my stamp of quality. And if you ever notice a dip in quality, call me immediately. Here's my cell phone. Let's talk this through. I don't see having a bigger team as a liability. I see it as an asset.
Yeah. So do you think that it would be difficult for an individual freelancer to make that transition though? Or do you think you have to just look for new clients?
I don't think it's difficult, but I'm just basing this on my own experience and my own belief in self. So I'm not sure. This would probably be easier for us to talk about if you were able to specifically say, well, here's the situation and how would you respond to that? Because like I said at the beginning, when I was a freelancer, I quickly shifted into becoming a company, and there wasn't this press release. There wasn't like this giant announcement. It didn't need to be. Clients gave me work. I produced the work. I started to change the rates. I hired people. They didn't even need to know. It was completely opaque to them. And there was no issue whatsoever. And what happened one time was this. I was freelancing, quote unquote, at a company called RGALA, which later then became Imaginary Forces. And I was working mostly with Kyle Cooper, but I worked with multiple creative directors there. And Kyle's producer, Saffron, called me and said, your rates are going up so fast. I said, yes, they are, because I realize how much work I'm producing for you. Please let Kyle know I've changed my rate. And if he's not okay with that, let's have a conversation. So the very next time I brought in some work and I physically would walk into the office, even though I could have emailed that to him, I walked into the office, I showed him the work. And then I just told him, I said, Kyle, I have other people that work for me to help me produce this. And at first he was kind of horrified and shocked. So he said to me, Chris, you're ghostwriting this whole thing? I said, well, do you like the work? So I didn't answer the question. I said, do you like the work? And he says, yes. Has the work changed for you? He goes, no. Have you ever wondered how I'm able to do 3 sets of storyboards in one day? He goes, it never occurred to me. I just thought you were really fast. I said, I am really fast. I'm fast at hiring friends to get the work done so that you get the amount of exploration that you need and just directing them. And so he went through the range of emotions of, this is horrible. I've been lied to. I've been cheated, to, wow, you're right. This is how you get the work done. And this is how we're going to be able to give you more work. So I'm able to kind of run that whole arc. The trick is, and you tell your team this, is that when we go to present the work, our clients should not be able to tell the difference that it's you or me. Let's get us to that level so that they can't tell. Now, if you're producing subpar work because you hired C players or D players who are just out of school or not even good designers, then you're going to have a real problem. Then you're going to submit work that's subpar, substandard to your clients in trying to pass it off as your own work. That is a big problem.
Yeah. So do you think if you were going to do this again now, would you kind of tell your clients up front, like, oh, I'm booked on this other job. I can't do that for you right now, but I have a team, like some of the freelancers that I regularly work with, and I'll oversee everything. And, you'll get the same kind of quality from them as you would from me. Are you happy with that? Or would you kind of do it and then tell them afterwards?
Yeah, that's a great question, Haley. I mean, I don't feel compelled to tell the clients that I use a Macintosh with 32 gigs of RAM and a 6 terabyte hard. Like, they don't care how the sausage is made. And I think most business people understand that businesses are made of many people who are parts of how things get done. Clients call me all the time. Here's a story. One of my clients at the time, they run a consumer electronics company. Like, Chris, we can't handle the work that we got. Can you do this? I said, sure. I'll do this. And I just want to let you know. And he goes, stop. I don't care how the work gets done. I assume you hire people and you do all the things that you do. So don't worry about even, he didn't even want to hear the explanation. He's a business guy. He understands. He doesn't put the chips inside the machines. He doesn't shrink wrap the boxes. He doesn't oversee the printing. He hires people to do that. That's how businesses think, and that's how they operate. And I think what happens is creative people, designers, animators, they think there's another animator on the other side as a client talking to them. Well, did you set the keyframes this way? No, that's not their position. And if they could do that, they would do it without you. What they're in the business of is the running of their business, how to get clients, how to provide better customer service, how to grow their company, how to manage their teams. They're not sitting there worrying about, oh, is the keyframe set correctly? Is that a easy ease, or what did you do there? They're not doing that. They're just running their business. So you as a creative person need to remember that not everybody is you. And it's a beautiful thing that that's the case. That's why they need you. So I would just do the work and just submit it. I'm going to art direct it. I'm going to creative direct it. I'm going to sometimes have to work twice as hard because I hired the wrong guy or gal and have to fix the work that they made. And that's the risk and liability that I took. And because there's risk involved, I'm going to charge more than what I normally would charge because there's risk involved in managing this person. So I don't want to eat it in the shorts when I miscalculate and I bring in some new person that ultimately doesn't deliver. I will charge more. And that's how businesses are built. And so you build in a little cushion, a margin of error, if you will, so that you can take the risk. And what happens, this is how our economy is built. Big companies give projects to smaller companies or medium-sized companies. Medium-sized companies give it to smaller companies. Smaller companies give it to individuals. Individuals take that money and they buy food and necessities for their family. This is how it works.
So basically, if you're going to try and hire people and kind of start a company, whether you're working remotely with other freelancers or not, it's probably easier to start trying to charge a project rate to direct clients than a day rate to kind of production companies or agencies, because they're going to be able to distinguish you from another freelancer. Whereas if you're a company charging project rates to another company, they're going to accept that more easily.
I think there's a gradual process of how you would do this. If you're just a freelancer right now, what I would do is just charge a higher day rate.
Yeah.
Let's say you can charge $700 a day because you're that good. Then what I would do is I'd hire a young person for $300 a day and coach them up. So there's value here. There's value to everybody in this chain. The company that pays you $700 a day feels like they're getting better product from you than the month that they're paying you. That's why they do the deal with you. The young person who's getting paid $300 a day is grateful for the opportunities to be able to make some money and to learn from a seasoned veteran like yourself. So people often just look at the money that they're getting paid, but not necessarily everything else that's valuable to them. So when you're teaching them, they're learning and growing. So the next time they go out into the world, they can charge $400 a day. And you, by managing them and teaching them and showing them things, are able to capitalize on your ability to scale how much work you can do. So you pocket the difference of $400 and you're able to grow this and add more people. And then as the $300 a day person grows and gets better and better, you can bring in another person and say, now I want you to train the next person. You pick the next version of you. Look for the same attributes that you have. Self-starter, quick to learn, great work ethic, a great attitude, and you train them. And so you start to scale the company. This whole time, you could be growing a company without even having to change a single thing. You just charge enough where the difference between what the clients pay you and what you pay the next person to do the work is worth your while. It's worth the risk that you're taking of it going wrong. Now, eventually you're going to come to this point and you don't want to sell time anymore. You want to sell the solution and not time. This is when you start to move into the project-based bidding, where you say, well, I'm really experienced. I got a small team. I kind of know within a reasonable margin of error that it's going to take between 7 to 10 working days for 3 people. I do the math, I do the overhead, and add in whatever other fees, management fees, and then I do a project fee. And if I run that really well, I make more money. If I run that horribly, I make less money or I potentially lose money. And then that's when you start to move into that phase. And then we're not even getting into value-based pricing yet. So those are the 3 things, right? Selling time as a freelancer, selling a fixed fee bid, which is you kind of estimate time and materials and you add markup and you sell that. And that's another way. And the last way of bidding, which is more complicated, is value-based, to say that irregardless of the time that we work on it, this is how valuable it is to you. So we will negotiate how much to charge. Now I have to admit to you, way back in the .com boom, I talked to a friend of mine. He runs a interactive design firm. He says, oh, you guys do fixed bids, huh? And he kind of smirked and laughed. I said, how do you guys do it? He says, well, we just have our attorneys negotiate with the client what the project's worth. And that seemed like such a foreign, distant concept to me at that time. But now it totally makes sense to me that each company risk a certain amount when they hire you. Meaning there's a risk associated with hiring a company if it goes wrong. And the bigger the company, the more people that are going to see it, the higher the risk. If you're going to run the advertising or marketing campaign for the next president of the United States, if it goes wrong, you risk a lot. So the value to that person is much higher than it would be to Mama and Joe's pizza shop, where if you run a marketing campaign, it doesn't go well, it's still just kind of a small mom and pop business and they'll survive because their reputation is more important than what their identity system looks like or what their campaign looks like. And so then you learn to associate price and value based on risk associated with that. That's value-based pricing.
Yeah, so I want to dig into that a little bit more because I understand how it works, but then I find it difficult to, say you have a new client that comes to you and you don't know anything about that company. You could do research, but then if they say to you, what's your rate or how much would you charge for this, for the project or whatever, how do you get around that and then get to this value-based pricing quickly, if that makes sense, so that you can know whether it's worth it or not for you to kind of go ahead? Because the thing is, like, when I get a client come to me, I want to know that they've got enough money to pay me. The easiest way to do that is to either give them an estimate for a project rate or tell them my day rate, if that makes sense.
That totally makes sense. So this is going to be the most valuable piece of information I'm going to be able to tell your audience right now with 30 some odd minutes, right? You ready? I'm going to tell you how to do this. This is not about doing research. The phone rings, ring, ring. I'm Joe Acme from blah, 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 and I want to do a project with you. Well, how the heck are you going to research this? And unless it's a publicly traded company, you're not going to know.
Yeah.
There's no way for you to even know. So what I like to do is I like to ask. Just ask the client. Okay? So let's go through the process, okay? And we do this quite often on our show. We do role playing. So I would just play both roles to just move this thing along really fast, okay? When a client calls me and says, Chris, how much would you charge us to do a 30-second commercial? I'd say, great. Well, before I can provide you with an estimate, I have to understand the scope of what we're trying to do. They're great. Okay, so the word scope means something to business people. Let's scope it out. They're like, what do you mean, Chris? Well, are we going to have live action? Is this all animation? Is it 2D or is it 3D? What are we thinking about? And why are we even building this in the first place? Oh, okay, you raised some really good questions. I don't know. What would you recommend? So, well, I can't make a recommendation unless I know what your intent is, what your objective is. And in order for me to understand that, I have to sit down and do discovery with you, for which I charge money to do. Now we're getting really deep into the conversation. Let's assume they have this great script and they're like, here we go. We know exactly what it's going to be. Mostly a graphic animation, like an explainer video using icons and 2D graphics. Great. I know what that's going to be. Okay. So let's call it the client Joe. So Joe, based on what we're talking about, we're not doing original music. It's a 30-second spot. I got your script and the script is signed off by you. We're good. Here's what we're going to charge. For a project like this, we're going to charge anywhere between $50,000 to $700,000. Now you're probably sitting there, Joe, thinking, why is there such a big range? And we can get into this, okay? Because I don't really know how you work, Joe. This is a brand new call. And if it's really streamlined and it's very simple, it will probably be on the lower end. Now, I don't suggest for anybody that's listening to this to price bracket something so gigantic. I'm just exaggerating to illustrate. I'm trying to gather the client's comfort level for this.
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't want to do like $50,000 to $55,000. That's such a narrow gap. Why even say two numbers? So I want two big numbers. I want $50,000 to $200,000. Maybe that's a more reasonable bracket between those two. And most likely, Joe's going to come back to you and say, wow, Chris, that is a lot more than I was expecting. Last time we spent $60,000, I'm thinking we need to be around 60, right? And this is where the art of negotiation comes in. And I would say then to Joe, that's great, but I can't probably do this work for 60 because that's the near the bottom of where I'm price quoting you here. But let me ask you this question. If you loved what you got last time for 60, why are we talking right now? I'm going to assume you had a great time, great customer service, incredible creativity, great communication. They're very responsive. So why are we talking, Joe? And Joe will likely say, well, we don't feel like they pushed the envelope and they were non-responsive and we're tired of working with them. We think they're taking the account for granted and we want some fresh eyes. So great. So you do want to change. Because there's this great quote by Stephen Covey. It's like, if you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to keep getting what you're going to get. So you want to change. And I'm glad we're talking now. So this is where I kind of just keep talking to them to kind of figure out. And I try to get them to say to me what it's worth. But I'm not coy about it. I'm not trying to be evasive. It's just going to be between this and this. And we work through it. And so eventually I'm going to come to a comfort level. So like, okay, Chris. All right, I hear you. I can probably go and knock on some doors and bust some heads and get us more money. I can probably get us somewhere. I can probably get us in this ballpark somewhere. I said, great. So I'm going to go away. I'm going to work on an estimate for you. And I'm thinking I'm going to come in at $175,000 based on our conversation. Now that I got more clarity about what you want, I kind of know what it's going to cost. And there's a little bit of a tight deadline here. And we're going to have a couple late nights and maybe some weekend work, which I'm prepared to do. So I'm going to come in at 175. How does that sound to you, Joe? Joe's like, I guess we can make that work. So the way I'm going to respond to that is to say, I notice some hesitation in your voice, some reluctance to move forward. And when I hear these things, they're a clear sign to me that we're not comfortable. You're not comfortable. And I don't want to go away and build a bid for a bid's sake. Let's talk this through. What is holding you back? Well, you're a new company, you're small. He's going to throw a lot of objections out and you got to work through that. At the end of the day, what you need to be able to do is to say, I think Joe is just fishing for a bid to drive down the cost of some other bid. In which case, I will just address it. I will say to Joe, it sounds like you need a third bid and you're not seriously considering us. And that's okay for me to hear. I just don't want to go and put all this heart and blood and sweat and soul into doing this and thinking that there's a real opportunity here. If you just need a check bid, let me know what number you need it to be in at and I'll submit it. Oh, okay, great. Thanks. So you need me to make a check bid for $87,000. I'll have it to you by the end of business day tomorrow. So you just go in, you just fudge some numbers in Excel and you give it to them. And that's it. So one thing that I learned from my business coach is you have to create space for people to feel comfortable to tell you the truth. If you're like Ellen Eager and you're ready to go in and just everything sounds like yes to you, well, everything they say is going to sound like it's great. And then you're shocked and horrified when you don't get the account or when they don't even call you back to say they got the bid or thank you very much or we moved on. Because you're so eager, you have happy ears on and you're just listening for whatever you want to hear. You're not even present to the conversation. So when somebody doesn't enthusiastically respond to a question that I ask, I know there's something going on there, even if I can't see their face.
So do you think you can do that over email or would you suggest that you get on the phone?
I'm not a great writer. And what my business coach says, most people are not great writers. And if you're not a great writer, don't try to communicate through email. So much is lost in email because of the words you choose, the way you phrase things, the sequence in which you phrase things matters too. So we're not great writers. So I suggest writing as just a summary of what was said, but no more. So if somebody reaches out to you via email and say, Chris, we got a great project. It's a 30-second commercial. I got a script. I'm ready to go. Yeah, great. Let's have a conversation. When are you free? Tuesday at 3 or Wednesday at 5? Great. Let's get on the phone. Because you can see how I'm talking to you right now, that if you were to transcribe this, it would seem really strange.
Yeah.
Because so much is lost in intonation, inflection, pauses, all that stuff is gone. And here's a tip for you. Oftentimes when we have to say very difficult things that may feel tense to us, my suggestion is to say it while smiling. Nobody can see it, but when you say it while you're smiling, it comes out a little different. It takes the edge off of it.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it's like hard for creatives to pick up the phone. And I know it's helped me in the past if there's been like a problem with something and you can tell on email that they're not happy. You know, I think a good tip is definitely then pick up the phone and talk to your client. But I haven't really heard that much, you know, people saying at the beginning, because I guess people think like maybe it's more a waste of their time. Like say if someone doesn't have enough budget or whatever, rather than just go, oh yeah, it could be around this. And you kind of just say the number that you would want or probably a little bit higher, because then, you know, they're always probably going to say, oh, we don't have that, you know, what about this? But I think that kind of makes sense because then, you know, you're sort of pushing them into a corner in a way where you can't really do that in email to kind of tell you what they're really thinking.
Yeah, I know we're having a very casual conversation, but I'm very particular about words because I think the words that you choose code the experience. When you say, and I'm not picking on you, Haley, I promise. When you say push them into a corner, that sounds very confrontational and that's scary for a lot of creative people. I'm not trying to push anybody into a corner. What I'm trying to do is to check their temperature. I want to make sure that we're on the same page. And here's an analogy for you. You know, when you go to a new restaurant and you're like walking down the street, you're thinking about what to order. What do most people do? They look at the menu. And they look at the menu, and depending on if you're on a date or not, there's a couple of ways you handle this, right? When you're looking at the menu and you see the prices are ridiculous, you're not going to go there because you can't afford it. And the excuse you would use is if you're with a date and you don't want to embarrass yourself because it's too expensive. You're like, yeah, I'm not really in the mood for filet mignon. Let's go to a noodle shop. And that's what you would say, because you're getting a preview of what you're about to get into. The restaurant wisely knows that this is what people do. So the ones that are hip on this, which almost all of them are, what do? They put the menu right behind a piece of glass right by the door, on both sides of the door. And they don't crowd you either. Notice how the maitre d' or the concierge at the front of the restaurant doesn't sweat you while you're looking at the menu, because they know this is a great way to filter out the people who want to eat here and people who don't want to eat here. And if they see you walk in and you look like a little puzzled, like you're not in the right place, what they'll often say, and they've been trained to do this, is to say, would you like to see the menu? What do they want? They want people to sit down and order a piece of bread and a glass of water and leave. They can't turn that table. So let's look at you as a business owner, even as a freelancer. I want the clients to know that they like the offerings that we have and that they can afford it. So I'm going to talk about that really early, and I want to see their reaction right away. I just want to know.
Yeah, so don't you think it can get more awkward though if you were on the phone with someone rather than sending them an email? I'm just trying to play like devil's advocate a bit, because I know like how a lot of freelancers think, and they'll be like, no, Chris tells us to like call every single person up that contacts us, but you know, maybe it's like not worth that extra kind of time, I guess.
Oh, I see. So you should do what the restaurants do. You should just put your price right on your website, front page. You can say our minimum level engagement is $50,000, $30,000, $2,000, doesn't really matter. My day rate is $475. So anybody that's trying to lowball you, they don't even bother emailing you. Our projects typically run from this price to this price. You can put that right on your homepage if you want. Then you won't get those people pestering you. Oh, I thought you did this for free. I thought you would do it for your portfolio. No, I don't. I don't do that.
Yeah, I guess. But then, I don't know, I find it a bit funny when people put their rates on their site, because I feel like, you know, like you say, you would probably charge differently for different companies. Like if it was a charity or something, you know, obviously like a small charity, maybe you'd want to do it for slightly cheaper or something like that.
I know what you're saying. And it seems weird to put your price there so everybody can see it. It feels very vulnerable, like you're running around with their pants on. I get that. But if people are calling you and taking up too much of your time, you got to do the equivalent of the restaurant, right? A variety of offerings that you have. So you have the salad, the appetizer, and you have the main and dessert. And you can put that up there. For charitable work, it begins like this, where I'm able to give charities that I believe in an X% discount on my prices and be very upfront. Why do we hide behind that? Why do we treat design as such a uniquely different thing than all businesses ever? When I go to Dell, I know how much to pay for a computer. When I go to Apple, when I go to a restaurant, I know how much to pay. You know where I don't know is the flea market, the swap meet. Everything is like negotiated, and it's like it's tiring for me. I don't like doing that. I want to see a price tag so I don't waste my time. Oh, that's a Chippendale, blah, blah, blah. Oh, that's an antique vintage. Ooh, too rich for my blood. I want to know. I don't want the owner to force me to ask, how much is that comic book worth? Or what are you selling that for? It's a transaction, and it's a business transaction, and we're going to have to talk about money at some point or the other.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I've seen before on some companies' websites that they'll say, get in touch with us. And then they'll kind of have a checkbox like, is your project more than $5,000 or is it below $5,000? And, you know, I think that's kind of a way to weed out some people. Obviously, I'm sure they reply to everybody, but I thought that was quite a clever idea, really. There's
a company. It's run by Scott. I forget Scott's last name. He spells his name S-K-O-T. It's very unusual spelling. He runs a company called Philosophy, and they do web design work, web work. They put their prices everywhere, completely transparent, because it's how he manages his company. So you guys can look that up and check it out. And you can say, wow, that's very refreshing. Or that's, too revealing for me. The other thing that you can do is, if you're pretty web savvy, is to do a price calculator, a price estimator. Okay, how many seconds of animation is this? So that kind of puts us in a ballpark. Does it include, check these options, 2D, 3D, live action, green screen compositing, visual effects? And it just gives you a ballpark number. And it's like, if this is kind of like where you are comfortable spending, give or take, give us a ring. Here's my email, whatever. And then you can say, okay, now we can scope it. And that's just a starting point for the conversation. It's not meant to lock us in.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting idea. Something similar I wanted to ask you is, do you think that everyone should have testimonials on their website? Like, even if you're an individual freelancer, from your clients and things like that. I mean, I don't see it that much on other freelancers' websites, but I was kind of wondering what you thought.
Right. Now, what we need to understand is the basic fundamental idea about sales. First of all, people hire who they know, and then they hire who they trust. So if you can't be found, they're never going to hire you. Once they find you, can I trust you? Do we believe the same thing? Do you believe what I believe? And how can you mitigate risk? How can you be the least risky option? So again, the idea of being a freelancer excuses you from doing a lot of things that businesses do. Businesses provide referrals, testimonials. They provide you with a client list. They provide you with some basic things because, let's face it, it's called social proof. It's in Robert Cialdini's book called Influence. And he talks about how we may not believe you, but we believe the people who believe in you. So if you're a freelancer and you've worked at Buck, Brand New School, PsyOp, and Elastic, you must be really good because they've hired you. And then we have Patrick Clare saying something beautiful about you, saying you're the most amazing designer, easy to work with, a dream. Well, gosh, when I was considering you versus somebody else, I picked you. And why wouldn't I? I would be a fool not to. So if we can do our industry a giant favor, is to change the mindset. Whether or not you want to stay a freelancer or not, that's totally okay. But just assume and think of yourself as an independent business owner just to help your freelance practice.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. That's kind of why I guess I was thinking about it, because like you say, if you're a studio or you brand yourself as a studio, it's kind of seems like testimonials and things like that are more on there. And then other people seem to just have their work and that's it. And I guess that's fine to just have your work out there because, people can tell whether you're good or not. Or, if you're working for ad agencies and things like that, you would hope they would be able to tell, right? But if you're kind of going more direct to client and trying to get those jobs, it makes sense to me to have things like testimonials, etc., because they're not used to look at animation. They probably can't tell whether you're like 20% better than the other person or 50% or whatever. They don't know. They probably just found you, through a referral or through something, but they don't really know how you compare, if that makes sense. So I guess then testimonials and things like that from other companies would more come into play than if you were kind of doing the more, work for hire day rate kind of model.
Yeah, Haley, I want to say something here because I'm working on some content around this very topic, okay? Here's the idea, is that forget about what category you want to put yourself into, is that if you're listening to this and you've got more work than you can handle, your second hold, third hold, you don't have a day free and you're contemplating when you can schedule your next vacation, then you could ignore all of what we're talking about today. Just ignore it because you're doing great in life. But if you're a freelancer and you're working for certain kind of companies that you don't love working for, the work is kind of inconsistent and you stress out the minute your booking is over, I would suggest that you start to look at yourself a little differently. Okay, this next bit is going to be specifically for you, Mr. or Miss Freelancer. Here's what I'm going to say, is that you do need to understand something, that when you present your work that doesn't have a story is undifferentiated. Undifferentiated work has a lot of competition and substitutes for. Undifferentiated work and people and products are really seen as commodities, and the lowest price wins. When you buy certain kinds of detergent, you might prefer one brand over the other, but when one brand is half the cost of the other and you believe that they're kind of the same, you buy the cheaper brand. And it goes down the line from toothpaste to toilet paper, they're all commodities, and lowest price usually wins when you're comparing similar things. So when I land on your work, you assume that in the amount of time that I have to look at it, I can discern the nuanced bits between your work and the next person. And if I'm an educated buyer, yes, I can tell the difference, which I can. But that excludes you from every other kind of buyer that's out there that kind of see like, oh, okay, your work is kind of cool. It's like that bright poppy graphic thing that's so trendy right now. But then they land on another site where a person tells you a little bit about their story, about their process, how they work. All of a sudden, that person has a personality. And you know what? I like to work with that kind of person versus a non-person. Because I don't know if you're a jerk. I don't know if you're difficult to work with. I don't know if you're like socially awkward, and because I need to work with you. I need to know that you're responsive. And so I'll look at work, kind of apples to apples, and I see that this person has this very effervescent personality, that they're witty, they don't take themselves seriously. I'm going to hire that person over you all the time, day in and day out. And then that person gets all these opportunities and they keep building a better and better portfolio, even as a freelancer. So just think about that, guys. And here's a video that's going to be coming out pretty soon, is that you notice how whenever you go to a fancy restaurant and they ask you, would you care for some water? You said yes. They ask you, you want that to be bottled, tap, still, what they say, flat or sparkling. You got a lot of options just for water, right? Yeah, I want bottled water. So what they do is they come out and they hold the bottle in front of you and they open it and they pour the water into your glass. Why did they go through that ceremony? Is it because we don't trust them? Maybe. It's because water otherwise, without the vessel, the packaging, is just water and it's cheap and it's mostly psychological. So when they pour that water out of that beautiful glass bottle from Voss or one of the brands that you love, you say that's worth $4. Pellegrino, that's worth $8. Perrier, whatever. So just think about it, you guys. Without your story, without the packaging of it, believe it or not, you're just water. So I do believe it's important for you to tell your story, to tell the world who you are and what makes you unique and different, and your process as it's relevant to your work. That's really, really critical. And that's the difference between Arrowhead water that sells for 60 cents at Costco or one of those big box warehouse stores to something that is like Voss or one of these other brands. Big price difference, almost exactly the same product. Now, one could argue, well, one has minerals, one has electrolytes. I'm like, yeah. Tell that to someone who cares. You assume everybody is a water aficionado, that they do all this research, right? Now, I did a little research on bottled water. One of the most expensive bottles of water you can buy is from a brand called Ethos. Ethos is mostly sold through Starbucks. The guy who started the company, he pioneered this cause marketing thing where he leveraged the idea of clean water for impoverished countries, that every bottle you buy, they donate a very small percentage, like 1% of the revenue towards providing clean water to people that need clean water. And per fluid ounce, it's one of the most expensive bottles of water you can buy. Look at the name Ethos. It already says something about itself. And then you read it, it's like, we provide X percentage of revenue towards helping people that don't have a clean drinking water source, something. So you can feel good about yourself. So I'm not just buying the water, I'm buying the feeling that I'm doing good in the world, that I'm in some way helping somebody very distant from me to have a better standard of living. And that's a difference. And people need to understand that. Sorry, rant over.
No, it's fine. I think that was great. And I said before, I think that, I don't know whether it was on this podcast or in a talk, that people should, try and tell people their own values and maybe put their own values on their website and things like that. Because if you do that, I think you could attract people who have the same values. Maybe it's like people who would want to work with other companies who have a positive impact on the world or something like that. And it's like, if you don't say that, that company won't know to go to you. But then if you say that, one, I think you distinguish yourself from other people, and two, then you're more likely to get the work you want. It's kind of like you want to kind of make your niche obvious if you have one, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing about this is, look, if you're a freelancer, I just want to know you're fun to be with, to hang with, you're cool, you're not crazy. And there are people who are kind of aggro like that and they don't last long, but we already made a mistake of booking them, right? So then we'll unbook them. So really, if you do work that's mediocre and you got all this personality, it'll help you out a little bit for sure. But is it going to get you on that Nike account? No, it's not. Let's be realistic about this, okay? And that would be my next thing, is like, are you doing the work that you'd like more work of? And if you're not, what you need to do is just close that gap. Just close that gap. So my simple formula for getting work is look at the work that you'd like to get, look at your work, and just close the gap. That's it. You give people too much credit for wanting to take giant amounts of risk. So if you do something that's very flat, retro 80s, kind of video game graphics, and you want to work on the next Lord of the Rings, you sit there and think to yourself, I can do that work, but nobody's going to call you for that work. So if you want work, do the work that you want to get. Spend your own time, your off hours, your weekends, and do the thing that you want. Now, some people are like, oh, I'm tired then. I shouldn't have to do that. Well, you can sit there and not get the work while somebody else is doing it. That's up to you. Entirely up to you, but don't complain about it.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I also think, a lot of stuff, like you say, it does go on personality and things like that as well. I guess, like you say, it's what kind of clients do you want? What kind of work do you want to do? Obviously, no one should put anything on their show reel that they don't want to work on, because then that's just contradictory. It doesn't make sense. So I think I was just saying, you could find your niche by putting more of your personality in there and making more of that work on your site, rather than being, just another bottle of water, to use your analogy.
Yes, absolutely.
Cool. So I've got a few more questions from the community members. Ben Marriott has a lot of questions.
Okay.
Might not ask you them all, but he said, what's the worst career mistake you've made and what did you learn from it? Maybe that's a hard one. I don't know.
It is a hard one. The worst and the best decisions are always the hardest ones. Like, what's the worst thing, because now I have to think about all my experiences and try to find you the worst one. But I'll tell you one that I believe to be my worst business mistake ever. I worked at an ad agency at Cole & Weber in Seattle, and I was doing really well. I had a great boss. His name is Kevin Jones, and we're friends today. And Kevin just opened the world of advertising for me, even though I was not qualified to work in it. And he gave me anything I could ever want. And what happened was I'm just 21, 22 years old, and I'm working there, and then there's a new boss that I have to work with that I just don't like. He doesn't respect me. And then I just feel like this is stupid. And I think my ego got involved because my boss would tell me how to design and he wasn't a designer. And I felt very insulted. I felt very entitled and righteous as a 21-year-old, soon to be graduate from Art Center College of Design. And so I quit. I just quit that job. It's like, I don't want to work here anymore. And Kevin, being the super cool guy he was, he's like, I totally understand. Something had happened at the office. And he's like, just take the day off and let's talk later. And then I just made up my mind. I was so headstrong and stubborn. I'm like, I'm done. Advertising is not for me, especially not here. I'm done. So for the next 2 decades, I'm making commercials for ad agencies. And I keep thinking back to that moment. It's like, what if I stayed there? What if I stuck it out? What if I just do what people do in their jobs and just grin and bear it and work through the system? And ultimately, what could I have done? Could I have become somebody who did something significant at that company and then ultimately maybe partnered up with Kevin or partner up with somebody else in the agency and start our own agency? What would I've learned if I stayed there? That my career is going to be long. What was it going to cost me to stay there another year and a half? Just learn the ins and outs of marketing strategy, media planning, all the stuff that I'm never going to learn anywhere else. To see the inner workings of an agency, knowing very well that I would be on the other side of the fence for the rest of my adult life, working for agencies. And that's the one thing that I regret. Now, I said at the beginning, I used to believe this to be true. Because when times are tough and the jobs dry up and clients pound you on their budget and you're competing against 6 different companies and it's just brutal out there, you start to think, my God, I should have stayed on the other side. Well, luck would have it that Mr. Jones and I reconnected a couple of years back. And I told him, Kevin, I don't regret many things in my life. That's the one. He's like, shut up. He's like, don't even say another word. Look at you. Look at where you're at right now. Look at what you have. Look at this. And he's gesturing into the building that we're in that I happen to own. He says, you made the right decision. And shortly after you left, you were just ahead of all of us because we all ultimately quit and went somewhere else and did our own thing. So he kind of absolved me from my own stubbornness and my immaturity. And that's the closest I've got as being like a big business mistake.
Yeah, I guess that happens sometimes, but obviously you sort of learnt from it. But then it's funny how he kind of came back and was like, no, you made the right decision. You know?
It's the only person who could tell me that I would believe it.
Yeah.
Only person is my former boss.
Cool. That's really interesting. So I've got another one from Megan Spurlock. She wants to know your thoughts on climbing the ladder because obviously on this kind of career path, sometimes people go from like an art director to a creative director and then potentially running a studio, after you're a freelance motion designer, I guess. She wants to know whether you miss having a more hands-on kind of approach, and do you feel that it's positive or negative? I guess she's trying to think about like, sorry, Megan, if I'm wrong, that she is a person who really likes being more hands-on.
Right.
So I guess she kind of feels like, where do we go from there? Do you know what I mean? Like,
yes.
I guess we've kind of touched on this a bit earlier, but yeah, I think there's a bit of a struggle for freelancers who maybe don't want to, run their own studio and things like that. That's kind of what I'm reading into it. So I don't know, I'd like to hear your thoughts on, is there another direction that, we could take if we don't want to be the leader of the ship kind of thing?
Yes, absolutely. There's a couple of things here, and I don't remember where I read or saw this. It says, evolution is a competitive advantage. It's the reason why you and I are talking, because our ancestors had an evolutionary edge to the ones that didn't survive, the ones that couldn't find a mate, the ones that couldn't procreate, the ones that could not survive because of health reasons, right? We're the progeny of those ancestors. And so in your career and your life, you have to think about evolution as an absolute essential part of who you are. So if you're a person who's very hands-on and you like doing things, how are you going to evolve? And the answer is going to be very different for each person. If you're an animator, you might say, okay, I want to do more complicated things, or I want to challenge myself to integrate 3D, or I want to do cell, or I want to just keep growing. And this is an important part to your own self-image and to your own happiness. Super critical. Do not overlook this. You have to continue to evolve. Now, if she loves making things and she doesn't want to run the business because she wants to stay in the business, and that's fine. You can hire your own boss. I don't know if you know that. If you are such an amazing, talented artist and you're so in demand, you could hire a sales rep to go out and do your marketing for you so that you can command higher prices. You can hire an executive producer type person who will do the bid and also be a general manager and kind of hire people to help you. So you can get rid of all the junk that you don't want to do in a day and only focus on the things that nobody else can do. So if you're an amazing lettering artist, or you can paint style frames like nobody's business, well, there are things that you probably don't like doing. What might that be? Well, maybe you don't want to cut out the assets that need to be used, because that's kind of laborious and kind of tedious work. Maybe you don't want to organize your files afterwards into neat little buckets. Maybe you don't want to do the initial research and image gathering. Somebody else can do that work for you. So then you get to hyper focus on what it is that you truly love. So somebody, if you can imagine cloning yourself, who can build the rough comp for you and give it to you with all the assets organized and labeled in a certain way, that you just go in and you just tweak it and it becomes sought after, that everybody wants and desires. Well, there you go. So just the simple answer is this: look at the things that you're doing every single day, things that you'd rather not do more of, and the things that you'd like to do more of. What would you have to do? How would you have to change the structure in which you work in order to be able to do that? People have assistants, photographers have assistants, celebrities have assistants. Why shouldn't designers have assistants? Again, you provide a unique and valuable learning experience for whatever's going to work for you. This is the stuff that people pay for in school. So don't feel guilty about having an assistant because you're like, I have nothing to offer them. Why would they work for me? Well, because you have a tremendous amount to offer, and you can totally do that. You can also think about creating a personal brand that the things that you make are also desired by people in the creative space. So now you're selling to clients and you're also selling to fellow users, your peer group. So you make something, you build a personal brand and people love it, then they'll just buy what you make. Seb Lester is a great example of this person. Seb Lester picked up calligraphy as a hobby, a graphic designer, started working on this. He's got over 1 million followers on Instagram. If Seb Lester wants money, he just makes a poster and announces it to his audience and they buy it. He is printing money. That's a pretty unique place to be. And he's very much a hands-on creator. And there are many people out there like him. Why not do that? And I just want to tip, and I don't normally do this, I want to tell people that I'm working on a new lecture, a new talk. I don't know when it's going to be done, but it's going to be called Identity in the Age of Personal Branding, and why classical design is over. And classical meaning to people just make beautiful things. Because to survive in the 21st century, you can't just be a maker anymore. You have to be a maker and. What that and is, you decide. You have to be a maker and a public figure. You have to be a maker and a community builder. Those are the people who are going to thrive. And if you look at people who are doing well in the design creative space, the ones who've created a strong personal brand, who have a following, have an audience, a community built around what they do, they're very powerful. And then you can go back to making again because people will support you.
Yeah, I think that's really great. Just it's about changing your mindset, I think, and how, there isn't just one way to make money or one way to progress your career. I think that kind of way of thinking is dying a bit, especially with a lot of After Effects people, making plugins and different things like that as well. I think people are becoming more clued up on, you don't just have to go down the traditional route. Everybody doesn't have to run a studio, if you're a successful freelance motion designer. So yeah, I think that's a really great answer.
Thank you.
Okay, so Jordan Quackenbush says, if you could snap your fingers and change something about the industry, what would it be?
I would love it to be creative led instead of the creative process being at the end of the cycle. Now, smart companies are realizing the power of creative thinkers. And I don't want to limit creative thinkers as to people who make graphics or do animation, but just people who are able to see the connection between two disparate things. I was reading a book called Selling Expertise by David Baker, and he says intelligence is based on pattern matching. When you take an IQ test, there's not a lot you can study for. It's how quickly can you recognize patterns, right? And creative people, whether you're an accountant, a lawyer, an engineer, or a graphics person or an illustrator, you're able to see the connection between things that normal people can't see. And these are the best people, in my opinion, the most primed to solve some of the most challenging problems facing our times with global warming, with culture, with society, racism, all these kinds of these social inequality. Why not put creative thinkers in charge of these things instead of the bureaucrats or the technicians to do? If we invert the model, I think we can have something very beautiful. I was talking to Robert Wong, I believe is his name. He's the design director at Google Labs. And he talked to me about how Google is able to make such big impact in the world. And they don't get involved in a product, a service, or an industry unless they think they can 10x it. And he says there's a very simple formula. Imagine a pyramid, if you will. At the top of the pyramid are analysts, the planners. And then if you go down from that, the researchers, their executive team, and then down from that is accounting, and then it goes to engineering. At the very bottom of that pyramid are the people who actually make things, the designers, the user interface people, the product industrial designers. They're the ones who actually turn it into something. So he says, in most companies, it trickles in from the top. The executive tells the analysts what they want. They see a trend and they research it. They do focus groups. They do all these kinds of things. And eventually they do cost study, and eventually it lands in the laps of creative people that make it. So at Google, what they do is they just invert the pyramid. The creative people, the people who actually make things that you can actually see, touch, and feel, they start there. So the creative people come up with ideas and prototypes. They're non-functional. They're just whatever they want to be. And then the engineering team looks at it and says, can we build this? Okay, and then they collaborate. And then it goes down to testing, and then it gets brought up to the executive group. It says, if you start there, you can iterate lots of ideas, you can move really fast, and you get the best people driving what it is that you're doing. It's not being led by graphs and charts. And so if I could snap my finger, that's one thing that I would do for the creative industry.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting and a really good point. I don't think that was what I thought you were going to say, but that's really cool.
What do you think I was going to say?
I thought you were going to say something about pricing. I don't know why. I think that's what I think.
That's what I'm known for?
No, I don't know. Just because I feel like, that's a big problem in the industry is pricing. So,
you know why I didn't say that? I'll tell you why. It's too easy of a problem to solve. I'm working on that problem right now. The other problem requires a seismic shift in the way that we look at creativity. And it would have to start with redoing our entire dismantling our education system. Because what our education system does, it's designed to stamp out individuality, to stamp out creativity. That STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, didn't even include art for some time. Then it became STEAM because they added the art back in there, and there's not enough of that. And I'm doing everything I can to make sure our education system does not strip the creativity from my children. So I do counter programming, and we get into these conversations I share, and I say, look, you can learn this. If there's anything that you want to do, we can do. I don't care what grade you get. I don't care if that test means it means nothing to me. So I'm just probably 2 clicks away from just homeschooling them, which I don't have time to do, but that's probably what I would prefer to do.
Yeah. Cool. Well, you said so much great stuff. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
You're welcome. It's been my pleasure. And thanks for being such a great host.
Thanks so much again to Chris for coming on the show. If you want to check out the work that Chris does with his company, you can go to blind.com. Also, if you want to check out his YouTube channel, just go to YouTube and search for The Future. And The Future is spelt Futur, and you can see all of his great videos and helpful tutorials and things like that over there. Also, I'd just like to take a moment to read out one of the iTunes reviews that we got from Kivo1979. Kivo says, I'm a freelance designer / motion graphics artist who opened up his own business a year ago in Toronto, Canada. And so many questions that I've had over the last few months have already been answered in the first few episodes of the podcast. Most importantly, figuring out how to go about charging clients for various projects, hourly or flat rate, etc. Motion Hatch has already given me the knowledge and confidence to charge clients exactly what I'm worth. Looking forward to future episodes. Well, thanks so much, Kivo1979. We really, really appreciate any reviews. So if you want to go to iTunes and leave us a review, if you just hop on over there and search for Motion Hatch, you can do that. And that really, really helps get the podcast out there. If you're not part of our community yet, you can head over to motionhatch.com/community and we'll send you an invite to our free Facebook community. That has over 1,000 members in there now, so it's really, really great. There's loads of people asking questions about pricing and people meeting up in different countries and things like that. So it'd be super cool to see you in there as well. Thanks so much. I look forward to speaking to you soon. See ya.